In the dim light of a dungeon, imagine a prisoner bound in chains, hearing the echo of dripping water and the distant clink of iron. His crime is not yet proven. His fate lies not in battle, but in the hands of shadowy men who wield strange instruments of pain. This was the hidden face of the empire, the world of interrogation chambers, where justice and cruelty walked together. And behind these locked doors, torture devices were not only tools of punishment, but weapons of fear designed to break both body and soul. The Ottoman Empire is often remembered for its grandeur, its palaces, its sultans, its armies stretching across continents. But behind the splendor was another reality, a system where truth was sometimes extracted not by reason, but by force. In these chambers, interrogations were staged as silent wars between prisoner and state, and the instruments used told a darker story than any battlefield could. Among the most feared was the bastinado. At first glance, it seemed almost simple, just a stick and ropes. But in the hands of skilled tormentors, it became a weapon of terror. The victim's feet were tied, the saw's stretched upward. Then, with rhythmic strikes, blows rained down. The pain was unbearable because the feet, delicate, full of nerves, were struck again and again until flesh tore, until the prisoner screamed truths or lies just to make it end. To walk afterward was agony. Yet, this method left fewer visible scars, making it favored by officials who wanted information without creating martyrs. But the bastinado was only the beginning. Deeper in the cells, one could find the iron collar, an instrument shaped like a heavy ring with spikes turned inward. When fastened around the neck, every movement drove its teeth into the skin. The prisoner had no escape, not even in sleep. Days of suffering followed, the slow bleed of dignity and strength. It was less about questions and more about breaking the will of those who dared defy authority. The empire's torturers also perfected methods of fear using water. One was the suffocating practice of forced drowning. Prisoners were tied, their mouths forced open, while water was poured in until the chest convulsed and the lungs begged for air. Some survived, coughing and trembling, their voices spilling confessions. Others were left as examples, reminders of what awaited anyone who resisted. In an empire where secrecy was power, water became as sharp as a blade. Then there was the infamous stretching rack, a device known across continents, but adapted in Ottoman chambers. The victim was tied by wrists and ankles. Ropes turned slowly, pulling the body taut. At first it was pressure, then joints popped, shoulders tore, ligaments snapped. The cries filled the stone walls, a grim symphony. It was not always meant to kill, though many perished. It was meant to show what the empire could do to flesh when loyalty faltered. Yet, perhaps the most terrifying device was not of wood or metal, but silence. It was the coffin cell, a box barely larger than a body. A man was forced inside, unable to stand, unable to lie flat. Hours turned to days. The mind unraveled faster than the body. Darkness, silence, the sound of one's own breath. Some begged to be beaten instead. This was psychological torture, showing that the Ottomans knew pain was not only physical, but mental. Still, it would be wrong to think every whisper of torture was truth. The empire, like others of its time, believed pain revealed honesty. But pain often revealed only desperation. Men confessed to crimes they never committed. Women accused others to save themselves. Torture was as much about fear as it was about truth. Yet there was a paradox. While torture was used in secret chambers, Ottoman law, rooted in Sharia and canon, often warned against false testimony. Sultans themselves sometimes issued decrees limiting cruelty, knowing its dangers. But in practice, in the hidden rooms of governors and palace guards, these rules were shadows easily ignored. In the heart of Topkapi Palace, whispers say there were rooms where slaves, spies, and traitors were questioned in ways never recorded. Eunuchs, who guarded the secrets of the harem, sometimes oversaw these interrogations. After all, to protect a dynasty meant protecting silence. And silence often came only after screams. Every device had a story. A rope, a whip, a collar. They were not just tools. They were symbols of power. They reminded the people that the empire's reach was not only across lands, but into the soul itself. The prisoner chained in the dungeon was not the only one being broken. His suffering was meant to echo beyond, a warning to every ear in the city. Even so, the question lingers. Were these horrors necessary for the empire's survival? Or were they simply the darker instincts of men cloaked in the name of justice? The screams that once filled the stone walls faded into whispers carried across the empire. Torture was never written in the glowing chronicles of the Ottomans. The court poets sang of conquest, of sultans and glory. Yet, in the dark corners of archives, scattered mentions remain, shadows of methods that tell us the empire's story was not only of silk and gold, but of blood and chains. The Janissaries, once the empire's elite guardians, were not only soldiers, but sometimes instruments of fear. When suspicion of treachery arose, it was they who delivered the prisoners to the interrogators. Their loyalty to the Sultan was absolute, but even they trembled at the knowledge of what lay within the cells. For even the Janissaries, if they disobeyed, could find themselves bound to the same racks they once guarded. One chilling device, often used in hidden chambers, was the iron boot. A prisoner's leg was placed inside a metal casing, and wedges were hammered between the foot and iron until bone cracked. A confession often came before the final strike. For the interrogators, it was efficient, swift, terrifying, leaving no room for silence. And though the empire thrived on laws, this was the unwritten law of power. Pain spoke louder than truth. The hot pincers were another weapon of the tormentors. Heated until glowing, they tore at flesh, each scream echoing louder than the one before. This was not only to gain confessions, it was a performance of authority. Every cry reminded all present that to betray the empire was to betray one's own body. Yet, not all torture left scars. One of the more sinister practices was sleep deprivation. Prisoners were kept awake for days, forced to stand, struck when their eyes closed. Minds cracked faster than bones. They confessed to plots real or imagined, sometimes naming allies who were innocent. The empire thrived on secrecy, and in its hunger, truth often drowned in desperation. In some cases, prisoners were forced into the pit of filth, a cell filled with waste and vermin. Hours became unbearable, days unbearable still. The torment was not a whip, but humiliation itself. To strip a man of dignity was often as powerful as breaking his bones. But perhaps the most dreaded punishment was the one whispered among spies, boiling oil or water. Though rare, the mere rumor of it kept silence across the empire. To speak against the Sultan was to risk the worst forms of death, though sometimes the mere fear of such horrors was enough to keep mouths closed. Torture in the Ottoman world was not only about traitors or spies. It touched the world of palace intrigue. A concubine accused of betrayal, a vizier suspected of treachery, a servant who overheard forbidden words. All could be dragged into the chambers. And the one asking questions was often more dangerous than the instruments themselves. Yet a strange balance existed. Some sultans were said to abhor excessive cruelty, preferring exile or execution to prolonged torment. Suleiman the Magnificent, for instance, was known for his legal reforms, yet even under his reign, whispers of hidden interrogations did not cease. For while the law forbade, power demanded silence, and silence was rarely won by kindness. The practice of torture also had another layer. It was a tool of politics. Viziers sometimes ordered brutal interrogations not for justice, but to eliminate rivals. A noble accused of plotting could be broken until he admitted crimes he never thought of. Once confessed under pain, his execution was swift and his estates conveniently passed to others. Torture, in this sense, was not just a tool of the empire. It was a weapon of ambition. And yet, the paradox deepened. In the grand courts, scholars debated justice, fairness, and mercy. Preachers in the mosques spoke of compassion and restraint. But in the hidden chambers where cries could not be heard, another empire ruled. An empire of shadows, where chains, fire, and iron decided fates. This duality gave the Ottomans their strength, but also their fearsome reputation. To outsiders, the empire was powerful, unstoppable, a realm of armies and riches. To those within, it was also a realm where a whisper against the wrong man could drag one to the dungeons. Still, the torture devices themselves became symbols. A rack, a collar, a boot, they were not only iron and wood. They were warnings, like ghosts standing at the edge of the empire, whispering, loyalty at all costs, silence above all. But as history shows, no empire, no matter how powerful, can rely on fear alone. For when fear becomes too great, it turns against its masters. The very janissaries who once carried out torture would one day revolt against their sultans. The empire that silenced voices with chains would eventually fall to the cries of its own people. And yet, even in its collapse, the memory of those chambers remained. The empire's palaces still stand, their gilded halls admired by millions. But beneath them, beneath the marble and gold, lies the memory of the shadows, the chains, the screams, the iron tools that once shaped destinies in silence. The empire's fearsome reputation was not born only from its armies, but from its ability to silence whispers before they grew into storms. And at the heart of this power lay the secret keepers, the interrogators, the guards, and the eunuchs who oversaw the forbidden chambers. Their loyalty was absolute, for they too knew the price of betrayal. The eunuchs of the palace, those who guarded the harem and carried the sultan's secrets, often stood as witnesses during interrogations. Their presence served a purpose. What was seen in the chamber never left it. A broken body, a whispered confession. These became locked behind lips sworn never to speak. To the eunuchs, silence was both survival and power. One of the most unsettling methods of interrogation involved the strappado. Prisoners' hands were tied behind their backs, and they were hoisted into the air by ropes until their shoulders dislocated. The pain was indescribable. Often the prisoner screamed the truth, or what the interrogators wanted to hear, long before their body was released back to the floor. Sometimes the drop broke bones, other times it broke spirits forever. Equally terrifying was the iron collar, a device with sharp edges that cut into the neck and shoulders when worn for days. A prisoner could neither rest nor sleep without the constant reminder of pain. It was not a swift torture, but a slow erosion of will. Each day dragged a man closer to surrender. But these devices were not always used in the dungeons alone. Hidden chambers within the Topkapi palace itself were rumored to house tools of silence. Here, even high-ranking officials could be questioned. A vizier accused of treachery might sit in the council one day, and the next find himself in chains beneath the very palace where he once walked in glory. Sometimes, torture was not about extracting truth at all, but about creating theater. When rebels were caught, the empire often staged brutal public punishments. The breaking wheel, impalement, and skinning were not everyday occurrences, but when they happened, they were unforgettable. Crowds gathered, and the message was clear: the empire does not forgive betrayal. One chilling tale tells of a spymaster accused of double-dealing with foreign powers. Instead of a simple execution, he was subjected to slow torment over several nights. Each night a new device was used: the hot irons, the ropes, the boots. His screams echoed through the corridors, a warning to any who might think of betraying the Ottoman state. When he finally confessed, his body was so broken that execution was seen as a mercy. The use of torture also carried a paradox. It created fear, but it also created resentment. Families of the tortured whispered in secret, their hatred hidden in the shadows. Generations carried those wounds, fueling anger that simmered beneath the surface of loyalty. For every confession gained, a seed of rebellion was planted. And yet, in the empire's golden age, these devices seemed invisible to the outside world. Visitors to Istanbul marveled at the mosques, the palaces, the bazaars. Few ever saw the dungeons. Few ever heard the cries. This was the empire's greatest illusion. The world saw its beauty, but within its heart beat a rhythm of iron chains and muffled screams. By the 17th century, as rebellions and janissary uprisings grew more frequent, torture was both a weapon and a risk. The rulers depended on it to silence plots, but every drop of blood spilled in secret could also feed unrest. When the janissaries finally turned against their masters, the empire that once used chains to control them discovered that fear is a double-edged sword. The empire's decline did not erase its shadows. The torture chambers may have emptied, but their memory lingered in stories, in whispers, in the way people spoke of the sultans. To this day, some rooms in Istanbul's old palaces remain closed, their silence as heavy as the past they conceal. And so, the story of Ottoman torture is not only about pain. It is about the hidden machinery of power, the tools that ensured silence, and the price paid by those who dare to challenge it. These devices shaped history as much as swords and cannons, though their traces are harder to see. They are the empire's invisible scars.